So my name's Cameron Cairns. I'm the Manager of Minerals Geoscience with the Geological Survey of Victoria, and I've been involved with the project for the last 3 years. Arrived, unfortunately, just after the strat drilling had been done, but got to do all the fun stuff with reporting and the data compilation following. So this morning, with the essence of time, I'll sort of go through a brief history of the project to provide some background, and then we've got another couple of talks before morning tea. So with no further ado, so as Richard touched on before, collaboration's been absolutely paramount, and while we've got a great selection of speakers today from their respective areas, it's a lot more people behind those talks that have contributed to the project through the course of the last probably 4 or 5 years now. And also from those other organisations, so drawing in expertise, and that was a big help for the GSV too, being able to work together with GA to generate the data and input to underpin some of the research we're going to hear about today. So for those who don't know, the Stavely Project area, it's about 20,000 square kilometres, and it sits in Western Victoria. It's about 3.5 hours drive west of Melbourne. About 300 k's or so. It contains the two regional centres of Hamilton and Horsham, which are about 10 to 12,000 people each. Horsham in the north and Hamilton in the south. Apart from that, it's mostly small country towns. Broadacre farming, mostly grain cropping. A lot of sheep farming, mostly sheep in the north, also in the south, but there's some cattle down in the south as well. There's excellent infrastructure, road, rail and port in terms of highway and power, and Portland, which sits down to the south. That's where some of the former mineral sands operations have shipped out of previously. The rail out there is going through in the process of a planned upgrade, and also interesting, Western Victoria is plan and investment into renewable energy generation, so wind farms and also solar in northwest Victoria. So for those who haven't ventured to the area, I'm just going to give a really quick virtual tour. Sort of photos have come a little bit redundant these days with Google Earth and so forth, but yeah, as I said, pretty quiet out that part of the world. A lot of the sort of mum and dad farms are now with people retiring and kids not returning to the farms are sort of finding their way into greater conglomerates. But quite single country lane roads. A lot of the time you get off the highway. This is in the central north part of the project area, looking south. It's the Cambrian Ranges. So the Cambrian Ranges marks effectively the western end of the Great Dividing Range, and consequently has an effect on the weather there. So south of the Cambrians, you have about 600 mils of rain a year, and to the north is around about 300 mils, something like that. Can get quite hot and dry in summertime. Cropping usually goes through to, crops usually go in around about Anzac Day or something like that, and pulled out around November. So this is it's just to the edge really of the project area. It's actually in the stall zone, and which is the zone to the geological zone to the east of Victoria, east of the project area. This is looking back west, Cambrian Ranges again there, and presumably this is probably around about springtime. This gives you probably see this photo a couple of times today. It's a bit of a classic one internally, but one, it gives a great idea of the landscape, but two, also gives an idea of the pretty limited outcrop that's sitting there. So Ross there doing his best to get every last bit out of that particular bit of exposure. So onto the geology. The surface or near surface expression of the Stavely Arc, which is Cambrian aged rocks. 19 upright fault-bound volcanic belts, which are anywhere from sort of 2 to 5 kilometres wide and about up to 150 kilometres long. They've been dismembered, if you like, from 4, possibly 5 original fault slices that have come off the arc at depth. I'll get to that in a moment. But low to medium K calcaline, tholeiitic through andesitic rocks. Really key point is that the exposure is, locally it can be quite good, such as areas like Mount Dryden and so forth, but overall it's relatively poor. and in the amount of exposure and the quality of exposure. So 0.5% of that 20,000 square kilometres is rocks of the Stavely Arc. 3.5% of the project area is Cambrian bedrock. So the other, one of the big breakthroughs out of this project is that detrital zircon geochronology would indicate that the Glen Thompson sandstone, which was thought to be younger than the Arc previously, is now appears to be actually older. And that's it contributed to this expansion of the exploration search space in that it can host porphyries, or at least the porphyries that we know about at the moment, and epithermal. And we actually we actually by chance jagged some epithermal-like mineralisation in one of the stratigraphic drill holes down in the south. The cover, as I said, it dominates most of the area, and it varies from Paleozoic right through to the recent. I'm going to leave that to David Taylor to talk to about in a moment. It is important to note that some of the cover is only tens of metres thick, and but also you've got early Devonian rocks which have precious and base metal affinities associated with the early Devonian intrusions, but also the Rocklands rhyolite to the west of the area. Where those, as touched on before, where those rocks are quite poorly exposed and very limited, but where they are exposed, there are a lot of mineral occurrences associated with them, mainly copper, and most of those are porphyry, VHMS, and epithermal affinity. So yeah, quite interesting. And also on top of that, a lot of them have supergene chalcocite in varying amounts associated with them. The timing of that, which is a little bit uncertain, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. The preservation looks pretty good from a porphyry environment, which is pretty hard to believe, with given that it's a sort of an early Paleozoic system. But again, we'll draw on that a little bit later. So previously, the historical exploration was largely confined to the volcanic belts themselves, but the exposed portions of them. So it wasn't really thought that mineralisation could be really outside of those belts, but I think we've been able to deliver several new concepts which would demonstrate otherwise. So the figure on the right there is the Seamless Geology, which is freely available to download for Victoria. It covers all of Victoria. The black dots there are the stratigraphic drill holes. So 14 stratigraphic drill holes were completed back in 2014 for 2,708 metres, spread out, chasing, I suppose, answers to some of the belts that we could see from the geophysics undercover. So they were spread out across the area. Some of the more well-known prospects are shown there for reference. If we just simplify things and go to the cover units, it'll give you a little bit of a flavour for where the prospective rock, or where the Cambrian rocks are exposed. And then if we lift all of that cover off, we get an idea of where these 19 volcanic belts. Now, they've been deliberately shaded, and that ties in with reconstruction. We believe that the 19 belts can actually be reconstructed through studying the structural framework to form those original 4 to 5 fault slices. And that has quite a lot of significant implications for prospectivity. But again, that'll be covered in talks to come. The moistened fold on the eastern side separates the Grampians Stavely zone, as it's known, from the Stall zone to the east. Stall zone may be familiar to a lot of people in the room, being endowed with gold, the Stall gold deposit, and the Yarramilchip fault in the west separates it from the Glenelg zone to the west. So the project boundaries were deliberately drawn a little bit wider than that to capture some of the relationships to bring into this current project. So there's a good example of the fault network. It's not all the faults. Probably we can't fit them all on here, but anyone going to the 3D model session and obviously the talks this afternoon will get a bit more insight into the development of that fault network. And finally, just to simplify things, the two black lines there indicate the 2 lines of deep seismic reflection, which were done in 2009, which I suppose before Stavely Project, well, Stavely Project effectively underpins everything that we've done. So onto that, deep seismic reflection. Victoria's, I suppose, in the last sort of 10 to 12 years has generated a workflow around this. So The SEISMIC in Western Victoria was acquired 2009. 2 lines that are about, or collectively 200 kilometres long. So line 1 in the sort of west-northwest was about 140 kilometres, and the line in the southeast, the Ararat line, was about 60 kilometres. So one of the reasons we decided to acquire that data is because it had worked so well in central Victoria in 2006, which gave some incredible insights, all of which have been published, into gold deposit formation in central Victoria. And so consequently, there was support there for 2009, and that was done in collaboration with Geoscience Australia, AusScope, and also the department from South Australia. The line just goes over the border. And just as of about 8 weeks ago, we finished a deep seismic transect in northeast Victoria, which is about 629.1 kilometres, which started south of Benalla, for anyone who knows where that is, and headed east as a couple of lines, and ended up on at the Tasman Sea, pretty much on the beach in New South Wales. So that was done with Geoscience Australia, AusScope, but also the Geological Survey New South Wales. So that data is just about to start getting processed, and it'll be really interesting to see what we find that. But it'll effectively give us a deep seismic transect from the South Australian border all the way across to the east coast. One of the really powerful things in Victoria with the deep seismic reflection is that you can take really robust geological relationships and mapping from the exposed Paleozoic bedrock in the Great Dividing Range, and directly apply it to the features that you're seeing in that deep seismic reflection. So you're not shooting blind. Sometimes that's the only option, but that's what's worked really well in Victoria. And of course, we followed it up with close-spaced gravity, so 200-metre stations, if I remember correctly, across this line, and later on with MT that was with the seismic lines, but Victoria also had the advantage of having the AusLAMP array, which is a national magnetotellurics project that covers all of Australia. Victoria was first cab off the rank, and it's all done. So really the key feature to take away from here is in the bottom, in the interp slide at the bottom there, that green shape. This is what sort of fell out, that look in the mid-crust there, looks like a potential volcanic arc edifice. And the exposures at surface, which had been debated about for a couple of decades now, there was a feeling that we may have some context for where these rocks are coming from and the greater system. So just to put things into perspective, there's those lines plotted on a pretty simple image, and we'll just put the Grampian Stavely zone there heading up into New South Wales. I'll let Ross talk to that in a little bit in a while, but just gives you an idea about where those lines sit. So the cover, well, can actually be pretty exciting. And this is from the northwest margin of the project area, Mount Arapiles. And this is Contact Metamorphosed Grampians Group. I'd like to think that's someone looking for facing directions, but Ross assures me that it may not be. Anyway, late Silurian Grampians Group, and in the background there is the current erosional surface of the Murray Basin, so effectively known as the Wimmera Plains. Gives you an idea of what, how flat and how concealed some of the rocks are. So it covers not something that we necessarily have to just plough through. One of some of the fundamental work that's gone into the current model is seminal mapping that was done by the next two speakers, Ross Cayley and David Taylor, in the mid-1990s, where a lot of the structure and the stratigraphy has been critical to understanding how the area has, including the Cambrian bedrock, has been deformed later on. And the cover can also host significant mineralisation, and in the case of Western Victoria, the Murray Basin hosts some pretty world-class mineral sands deposits, a number of which have been developed through the 90s and 2000s, and there is a number of the finer grained deposits which are still waiting for a technology breakthrough. This is a really interesting photo. It's of the Cambrian Glen Thompson sandstone. All looks pretty bland, but sort of from the top of that clay pit to the bottom is around about 25-30 metres, and that's the average depth of drilling historical mineral exploration drilling through the region. 93% of the historical mineral exploration drilling is percussion drilling, largely air core and RAB. There's 1% diamond drilling through the area. So I suppose what I think about when I look at a picture like this is how many of those early percussion holes from the 70s and 80s have ended in depleted regolith and haven't really tapped the bedrock for a representative sample. A lot of that historical drilling, which we'll hear about later, has been confined to those exposed portions of the volcanic belts, which is not very much within and immediately adjacent. So with all this this cover and somewhat uncertainty, this is where, apart from obviously the contribution to the deep seismic reflection, Geoscience Australia got involved and we created this Stavely Project and embarked on a stratigraphic drilling campaign in 2014. So as I said before, 14 holes, just over 2,700 metres. And we completed sonic through the Murray Basin, and that was largely to preserve the cover so we could understand a bit more or get as much information as we could out of that cover. So some of those drill holes will be on display tomorrow, including some of the cover rocks, just to get your eye in. And then we completed HQ triple tube diamond tails, generally about 50 metres or so into the bedrock. So it's always very exciting when you actually put some rocks to the actual geophysical signature. He's very happy, Dave Taylor, on one of the early holes with a bit of Cambrian volcanic bedrock. But as well as working with the DET CRC, which was part of that stratigraphic drilling program, we're also successful in bringing them back to Victoria with even more recent technology. And that's the coiled tube drilling rig, which for those who have followed the Deep Exploration Technology CRC, this has been a major deliverable out of that 8-year program. This was just the second field trial in Australia. It was the first coiled tube drilling for minerals that are done outside of South Australia, where the research is based. And this was just about 5 kilometres out of Horsham, through about 140 metres of Murray Basin cover, and then into 300, 400 metres into the Cambrian bedrock basement. So we got successfully through twice, and one of the reasons we wanted to bring this technology to Victoria was not just for to test it in the Grampian Stavely zone, but obviously the Murray Basin covers a lot of northern Victoria, including some of the prospective Bendigo and Ballarat zone. So when it was quite a different drill site to what most people would be used to, and a lot of researchers running around doing their own thing and so forth. There's no stick up on the rig because it's all digital on the so sort of getting your head around that, at least for a geologist who spent most of their time on drill rigs was difficult at first, but once they tuned, if you like, to cover, they were approaching 100 metres a shift. So we only drilled single shift in this instance, but it was a really great program to be associated with. It was in 2017. So a lot of pre-competitive data and knowledge, I'd add, that's come out of this program. So all the data releases from the stratigraphic drilling are all out and available, have been out for some time. It's pretty much the how, why, and when the data was collected. There's no interpretive. That was deliberate because the data was coming in at different rates. And I suppose in more recent times we've reached some of the really major deliverables. So the regional synthesis and mineral systems document came out earlier this year, again freely available to download. And the historical mineral data compilation was a good 18 months, 2 years of undertaking. So please see the staff out at the table there for all the ups and downs of that process and what's come out. The 3D model, the actual model itself, and the model files just went live yesterday. So that can be accessed through the GSV online store. The report is very close behind. We've just a couple of hurdles at the publication stage, but it's written. But both the 3D model and the regional synthesis are very comprehensive documents that cover off a whole range of items, obviously pertinent to mineral exploration, but also just the general geology in that part of the world. And A couple of other recent ones, rock explorer field trial and some extra gravity traverses we did. So last couple of slides now. Just want to touch on a few points that I think might be quite significant for mineral exploration in this part of the world and to provide some context. So this is a plot of the historical or open file historical mineral exploration drilling that's been undertaken within the Stavely Project area. So this is total metres over time. So exploration started in the early 70s when basically WMC pegged the first licences out there, going around chasing greenstones all over the country. And they didn't do a whole lot of work and withdrew pretty quickly. And it was a former oil explorer who actually came in and did some of the early drilling. And a lot of the early prospects were sort of discovered in the mid to late 70s, early 80s. Another discovery in McRae's, which is now called Eclipse, in the late 80s, and Fairview, a gold prospect in 2005, I think from memory, in an exposed portion of the Stavely belt. But apart from that, it's been a little bit dormant for discoveries for some time. However, that's, I think, largely a function of drilling and also providing the context that we're able to provide with this new generation work. So that's the period of drilling. And really interesting thing for me from an exploration background is that the acquisition of regional airborne magnetics by the Victorian government started in about 1994. Until then, most explorers were using a very early survey undertaken by CRA in about 1980, which is effectively a contoured mag image, which eventually became open file. But the acquisition didn't stop and didn't cease until late 2000s, and that's when the VIMP, which was the Victorian Initiative for Minerals and Petroleum, all the data generated that was actually brought together as a single regional data set. And that magnetics is the magnetics we've used to reconstruct the volcanic belts and understand where they go. So a lot of that drilling hasn't used a lot of the modern data that we know and use today. A couple of other key points for mineral exploration. So I genuinely believe that we have generated this new mineral exploration search space, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. I won't go through them all. There's too many for this talk, and people will cover it as we go through the day. But we've been able to restore those belts, and when we restore those belts, we end up with about 1,160 kilometres of prospective strike of the volcanic belts. However, it's not just the belts now, it's the Glen Thompson sandstone that's older and may host mineralisation. Yes, the porphyries and associated systems that may be associated with the arc activity, but also maybe conceptual mineralisation such as the Cetic style deposits of the Cambrian 2 group, now that it looks like the Glen Thompson sandstone may be the equivalent of that in South Australia. We believe we've got a way to differentiate between the Cambrian and Devonian intrusions. It looks like there's a number of early stage first mover opportunities, particularly with the belts undercover and in light of the new information. As I said before, to demonstrate prospectivity, where those belts are exposed at surface, there's quite a number of mineral occurrences. So it suggests that the belts continue undercover, especially where we've been able to correlate and reconstruct them, are looking quite promising as well. So I believe that's improved that mineral exploration targeting, but we've also taken, the concept to a reality, or albeit an early stage reality. So obviously a long way to go yet before a potential discovery is made, but I think it's a really big first step to take it out of that concept stage. We've got the regional framework pretty well established, but what I would say is that, it's 14 stratigraphic holes in a 20,000 square kilometre area. There's going to be more knowledge to be gained going forward. And just a couple of recent examples of that is some really encouraging and interesting porphyry style veining that's coming out of Thursday's Gossan in the last 6 months at depth. The Glen Lyle, I dare say I call it a discovery, but anomalous gold and silver under about 20 metres of cover in an area that's never been drilled. And also we In the stratigraphic drilling, we jagged a fault slice of granodiorite at 510 million years. So most of the porphyries that we know of look like they're around about 500, 505, but they're the ones we know about, and they're the ones we know about because they're the ones that are exposed. And I was drawing on previous experience in the porphyry environments I've worked in, is that there's always multiple phases, and sometimes they're not discernible from a geochronology point of view, but in terms of relative timing and so forth. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's more out there to be found. And we don't really have a good constraint at the moment on how many VMS cycles there may be in the window, which may go back as far as 525, start of the arc. It's a little bit debatable, through to around about that 500 mark. So I'm going to leave you on this slide, and I appreciate it's quite a schematic, and it may be it might seem like a little bit of fiction, but the reason I wanted to leave it is just to give you a bit of a flavour for this, and hand you over to Ross, who'll walk you through why we think that this architecture exists in Victoria and what it means for prospectivity. Thanks very much, and happy to take any questions if you've got any.